Good afternoon, and welcome to Wednesday Wisdom with John Beieler. Before we begin, I would like to share a video from our sponsor. Please welcome INSA Executive Vice President, John Doyen.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this installment of INSA's Wednesday Wisdom. We're pleased to host one of the intelligence community's senior leaders this afternoon. Before we begin, though, let me go over a few housekeeping notes. First, we hope to make this as interactive as possible. So if you have questions, please submit them using the Q&A box that's on the right side of your screen. We have over 500 people registered for today's program, which is a lot, so we'll try to get to as many questions from as many people as possible. Second, we're pleased to welcome members of the press to the call today. So this is a reminder that today's program is on the record. And finally, I'd like to thank our sponsor, SAIC. We simply could not deliver this type of premier programming for you without the support of our partners. And I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Lou Messing, Vice President of Programs at SAIC, who will introduce our speaker. Lou, over to you.
Hey, thank you, John, and thank you to INSA for hosting this program and for continuing to deliver vital thought leadership during these challenging times. The virtual format has been outstanding, and frankly, I'm not sure how we really survived without these virtual events. And INSA has really been a leader in migrating to this new world order, so thank you. SAIC is a proud supporter of INSA and has been supporting the intelligence community mission for the better part of 50 years. Most recently, a primary focus of SAIC has been on digital transformation, including cloud migration and app modernization, and in particular, and I think relevant to the discussion we're going to have today, analytic modernization. SAIC is spending a lot of time with our customers thinking about how we secure and then leverage data that is now more than ever co-located in the cloud and available to analysts, how we can apply semantic brokers, ontologies, other frameworks that will accelerate data integration and emerging analytic techniques like OBP or activity-based intelligence, and how we expand the number of resources, people available to support the IC mission through distributed or cross-domain development and analytics. And I know that OD&I is working on some of these things through their Right Trusted Agile Workforce and Augmenting Intelligence with Machines initiatives. And so hopefully we get some insight into where those are headed today. Now it is my privilege to introduce today's speaker. John Beieler is Director of Science and Technology at OD&I. In this capacity, he leads community efforts in science and technology, as well as identifying opportunities for future activities to provide and maintain intelligent strategic advantage. Previously, Dr. Beieler served as a program manager at IARPA, focusing on human language technology, machine learning and forecasting, and as a research scientist at Johns Hopkins Human Language Technology Center for Excellence. Thank you, and over to you, John.
Well, thank you, Lou, and thank you to SAIC for supporting this program. And John, I'd like to extend my welcome to you as well. I'm so glad that you're able to join us for a conversation this afternoon. And as the OD&I's director for S&T, you're in a role that helps to shape research and development activities and influence investment priorities across the entire intelligence community. So we're really looking forward to hearing about what particular initiatives you have underway and also the current priorities that are driving the IC. But first, to help frame the discussion, maybe it's best to start with looking at the big picture. And I'm interested to see, how do you see the strategic environment that we face today?
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, John. And first, I want to just say thanks to INSA for hosting this event and giving me the opportunity to chat about science and technology. So I'm looking forward to the great conversation. So to your question, John, about the kind of strategic environment, I think folks got the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to hear from my boss, Dustin Gard-Weiss, the DD&I for Policy and Capabilities, talk about how he sees this directorate that he now manages. And as part of that, the way he speaks about policy and capabilities is to posture the IC for the future. And what we see is S&T as fundamental to that, right? So in developing capabilities for the future, S&T really plays a critical role. So when we talk about this, we see three main facets of this future operating environment. One is obviously the pivot to great power competition. This is all over the strategic documents, the National Defense Strategy, the National Intelligence Strategy. You can't go to an event like this and not hear about the pivot to great power competition, so everyone can check that one on your bingo card. The next facet being the speed at which emerging and disruptive technologies move, right? So things no longer move on a decadal scale. Things go from initial idea to fieldable technology in 6 months rather than a year. And technology is more democratized now. So things that used to take, say, a university-sized wet lab to do a bioexperiment, you can now do on a tabletop application. So things move more quickly, more democratized. And then finally, facing the kind of fact of reality, and as we are existing in this COVID-19 pandemic, a flat or constrained resource environment. So we can't basically back up a dump truck full of cash to solve any of these problems that we have. So at a high level, what this really means is that we're being asked to do more in a more quickly moving environment and with a flat resource profile. So, all those things combined to really provide an interesting opportunity for us to develop some of these S&T capabilities for the community and set our strategic investment priorities.
Oh, great. Well, back about, you mentioned the great power competition. So back to to that for a moment. So we have our near peer adversaries, China and Russia. How do you see, as we continue to posture for the future, as you said, how do you see us, approaching that from, where we need to make S&T related investments or for intelligence purposes?
Yeah, definitely. Again, this really goes back to kind of the size and scale of these challenges that we have. So the difference between a near peer adversary is obviously they're near to our capabilities. So just, you can think through and conceptualize the kinds of capabilities that we have as a nation state actor, and then figure out how we have to operate against a similar competitor, right? And this is a little bit different than something like the counterterrorism mission, where the environment and operating environment threat space is decidedly different. Not to say that the CT mission isn't challenging in and of itself, it's just that with this pivot to near peer adversaries and competitors, it's a little bit of a different flavor that we're being asked to address. So we have to, again, really focus on this speed and scale. And what I will say is that this isn't a new challenge for ICS&T. You can go back to the days of the OSS and World War II days, and science and technology innovations are really core to how we operate as a community. You can look at the SIGINT mission, the CRIP mission, and we can go on and on to go through the history of the IC. So really, again, to this point about posturing the future, it's how we do these things better, faster, on more compressed timelines, and really match the speed and scale of the challenges that we have recently.
Okay. Yeah, I know, if you look at the history, there's pretty much entire focus on the Soviet threat and all the investments that were needed there. But now we have we have multiple actors. We've got, in addition to China and Russia, you also have North Korea and Iran are concerns. And then you mentioned counterterrorism. Of course, you have threat actors of many different types, terrorists included. How do you factor the multiplicity of threats? How do you look at that?
Yeah, so and I think we can definitely dive into this a little bit more in a second, but it's really about how do we rack and stack the priorities that we have, because the threat landscape is obviously very, very broad. So we have to cover everything. In my office, we think about these things in terms of 19 technological domains. So everything from AI to bio to chem to precision navigation and timing to quantum. So we have a wide range of technological areas that we have to make sure that we're meeting the mission gaps and the mission capabilities that we need to have to get after those outcomes that you're speaking to in terms of great power competition and threat actors. But at the same time, not being driven by that, right? So we don't want to just fall into this kind of faster horse territory where we just double down on the applications that we already have. So part of our job at ODNI S&T, since we're not a tactical mission agency, is to kind of have our head up and scanning the horizon to see what's coming down the pipe, to make sure that we are postured for that, for those future opportunities. Because again, we don't want to get in a case where something comes 5 years down the road and we just haven't really had that on our radar, and haven't been developing and putting in place the things that we need to answer some of those technological challenges.
Okay. Well, you mentioned these, I think you said there were 19 different areas. That's a lot of areas. So how do you set your priorities? What are your top, out of those, what are your top 3 or 4 priority areas that you are looking at for, say, the next few years?
Yeah, so happy to kind of dive into specific technological areas, and we can rattle those off the top of the head, but because those aren't really probably new to anyone that's sitting on this webinar today. Things like bio, things like advanced computational power, things like advanced sensing, AI and machine learning was mentioned at the intro. But you can go back into some of these strategic documents 10, 15 years, and those have been the same areas of concern. So I'm personally a little bit less interested in these high-level technological areas and more, again, about the needs that we have as a community. So, if you'll give me the opportunity, one thing that I was hoping to do today is we within ODNI S&T have put together this process to really pull through these mission needs and then articulate them out to a broader community to include industry. So just to quickly describe that process, what we've instituted is a mechanism by which we go to our mission friends, so people like the national intelligence managers who manage either a functional or regional area, and basically ask them what kind of capability gaps do you have, what things are you not able to do that you wish you could do, and then we translate that through into a science and technology need, right? So how do we address that particular mission gap with science and technology? And then out of that comes a list of needs. Right now, there's about 200 of them organized across those 19 tech domains. And as you said, John, that's too many to address in any year or even set of years. So one new thing that we've done is figure out how to adjudicate those needs by risk criteria. And so though that risk criteria is the likelihood that that need will come to pass, and then the consequence to the mission of the IC if it does occur, how damaging will it be to our mission if we're not able to process something or we're not able to collect something. And then what that gives us is this kind of adjudicated racked and stacked list of 1 to N for these needs. And then that really lets us target in these kind of top risky areas. So that's that kind of need process. And just to quickly say, the other side of that is to look at where we're spending in the budget and do a crosswalk between the needs in our budget to say where are areas that we're at risk because we're not investing, right? So if there's a high risk S&T need and there's an area that we're not putting money against, those are really the prime candidates that we would then, through a couple different mechanisms, communicate out to partners, be it the cleared defense industrial base, be it uncleared partners, non-traditional partners, academia, and happy to dive into those various mechanisms, but that's this kind of overarching process. And was hoping to have that up on the ODNI website today. I'll blame COVID that everything's moving a little bit lower than anticipated, but we will have that up on the ODNI website within the next couple weeks.
Okay, so when it is up on the website, so this is going to be a listing then of needs that you would be looking to industry or academia or other partners to prioritize their work. What's your expectation there?
Yeah, definitely. Because I know from my experience, and as was mentioned a little bit in the intro, I did come from industry and was a data scientist and have had the fun experience of trolling Fed BizOps for opportunities to work for the government. And I know whenever I was doing that, I always had a huge demand signal for what does the intelligence community or the DoD actually care about. So this is that mechanism by which we hope to articulate that. So we will have a couple different versions of this needs document. One is obviously classified, that will be on our classified network. So again, if you're a kind of cleared defense performer, that will be open to you, but you got to have a clearance. But we'll also have unclassified versions as well. And obviously those will have a little less detail than the classified version, but it will at least give kind of high level views of where we're interested. So we really do hope this will be informative to industry and, help shape some of industry's investments, help facilitate some conversations, and help facilitate some engagements with us.
Okay. On that note of facilitating conversations and engagements, is there going to be an opportunity for dialogue that you'll be having with the cleared defense industrial base and ODNI on this set of needs?
Yeah, so cleared industrial base and uncleared as well. So we have the historic mechanism, the INSTEP program. I know we've also done work with INSA to do some other forums to engage as well. And really what we're hoping to do within this P&C directorate, we have a group called the Private Sector Partnerships Group, is again, really scale these up and make sure that everyone involved is getting value, both industry and the government people, so that it's not just kind of meeting for meeting's sake. And that's what we really hope these needs will do, is say, there is a discrete need that we've identified in the community, and let's figure out how we can get some solutions to those things, whether that's widgets that exist now that we can pull off the shelf, or whether or not that's helping tee up R&D programs at some place like IARPA or someplace like DARPA. Again, really trying to be transparent, as transparent as we can be with what we're interested in and what we need, and then figure out the mechanism to best address that downstream.
Okay, so I know a lot of our industry partners have different processes where they determine their IRAD investments and how they're going to, do different types of work in different research areas that they think, is important. When thinking about posting this, I think there will be a lot of interest to see, is this going to be the type of information that you would hope would be factored into those IRAD decisions that different industry partners will be making?
Yeah, definitely. And again, kind of leaning back on my experience, we at my previous employers, we did, IRAD projects. And again, we want to make sure they were useful, right? And not just programs for program's sake. So from my point of view, one, the needs will help kind of set the left and right bounds of what we're interested in, but then piling onto that, I particularly am interested in the bleeding edge of technology. So, my background is machine learning, to use an example from there. I'm not particularly interested in, have you heard of these things called word embeddings, right? Because at this point, word embeddings are a well-known technique. It's really, what's the bleeding edge and where are the things that we're not thinking or we're not considering? And so and for those folks that have familiarity with what our mission is and what our problems are, how do we incorporate some of these things? Because in my experience, that's often the hardest issue, is not necessarily identifying a piece of technology or a technical approach. It's figuring out how to make it fit on some of our weirder problems, because definitionally our problems are different, because that's where we focus as an intelligence community, and not on kind of the long tail of things that normal industry might focus on. So those are the kind of considerations that I'm looking at, is communicating the needs and then really focusing on the bleeding edge technological solutions to those things. Again, to these points about over the horizon and things that are coming down the pipe for future opportunities.
Okay. Hey, I want to let you, we do have a question here that came in from Lewis Shepard with VMware Research, and he wants to know, where are you pleased and where do you see gaps into what the IC is doing and what the DoD is doing regarding S&T efforts? So are we acting in a whole of government manner, coordinating intelligence community plans and for S&T with the Department of Defense?
Yeah, so with our Department of Defense colleagues, I think we have really great relationships, both with R&E, within research and engineering within the Pentagon, with ANS, and obviously with the service research labs and so on and so forth. So I think those relationships are really strong, both at kind of the ODNI level as well as obviously at the IC agency level. But John, you mentioned whole of government, and I think that's one place that we could do better, is truly whole of government. So DOE Office of Science invests a ton of money in areas that we as an intelligence community are interested in. I feel like we're not as well lashed up there as we could be. The National Science Foundation invests billions of dollars every year in basic fundamental research, and I know they're always hungry for hard problems, and we're always hungry for enhanced R&D developments. So really, that's one of the focus areas that we have. And again, using this, I know I'm piling a lot on this needs document, so hopefully it blows everyone away whenever you see it. But again, this mechanism by which we can go to DOE, we can go to NSF and say, here's what we really are concerned with. how can we work together to solve some of these problems? So that's the true whole of government is where I think we could do some work, and that might be a pipe dream of mine. But within the national security complex, I think we're pretty strong. It's again, speed, scale to match these challenges that we outlined at the jump. The great power competition, the speed, and the constrained resource environment.
I'm smiling because, of course, this website will solve all the problems of the world
Exactly.
for us.
Yeah.
But no, I think one of the important things about this website is it will be a useful mechanism for communications and dialogue, and that is really what's needed, I think, to have that public-private partnership and to be able to really have an open, candid discussion about what the needs are, and a chance for industry to come back or academia to come back and engage and ask the questions about, well, what exactly do you mean here or there? So, hey, we've been getting a lot of questions in, and you mentioned machine learning a moment ago, so I'll start with some of the questions related to that topic. And of course, we know ODNI a number of years ago launched the AIM effort, Augmenting Intelligence with Machines. And we have a question in from Tosca Lichtenfeld with Palantir, who wants to know where is the IC succeeding and where is it failing on incorporating artificial intelligence and machine learning?
Yeah, so I know that probably seems like a simple question, but it's actually massively complex because what I'll say is, you reference AIM, Augmenting Intelligence Using Machines. You'll note that nowhere in that title does it say AI or machine learning. So really what the focus of that initiative is how do we refer to them as, augmentation, automation, and artificial intelligence technologies. And we really did that purposely because there's a lot that we can do that doesn't require high-speed machine learning, neural networks, deep learning, things like that. Right now, we have a lot of analysts that are basically hand jamming spreadsheets together. They don't need a neural network, they need a Python script. So it's really how do we set in place the processes that enables that sort of automation? How do we do things with our data? How do we have the IT policies in place so we can quickly deploy some of these technologies? And we've got great partnerships with the CDO, the Chief Data Officer, the Chief Information Officer of the IC to really figure out how we put these things in place. So to hopefully answer the question, really what we're focused on is how do we balance between solving some of these niche problems that mission users have, right? Because we can go around putting out fires, like this group needs to do this particular analytic, and we can solve those pretty quickly. But how do we balance that against some of these larger enterprise solutions that we want to develop to really get to some of these more forward-looking capabilities? Like how do we truly do sense making from multiple intelligence silos? How do we start to use intelligence together to get a better operating picture and really start to support some of our all-source analysts and some of this kind of causality? So what I'll say is, rather than saying where we're succeeding and where we're failing, what I'll mention is just a lot of the great work that I think is going on across the community and across the 17 agencies that comprise the intelligence community to really put in place the processes, the systems, the data, and the talents to really make sure that we're well positioned to deploy these things as they come along.
Yeah. Hey, thinking about AI and ML still, what are some of the technologies or applications for AI that you see that most excite you, most interest you as far as their applications for intelligence?
Yeah, so there's a few. So going back to my ARPA days a little bit, so I particularly am interested in information search and retrieval, and I feel like that represents a large amount of the problems that we have for the analytic community, right? The IC is awash in data, so our problem isn't getting more data, it's being able to find the needle in the needle stack. So technologies, machine learning, neural net based solutions to really surface personalized recommendations to an analyst, those are of particular interest to me. Talk a lot about low shot learning and few shot learning. So how do we train neural nets from a small handful of examples? Because again, we're interested in events and things that are by definition rare. Because if they weren't, the IC probably wouldn't have a huge interest in them. So we often don't see some of these things that often in imagery or something like that. So how do we train neural nets like that? And the final area that I think we, the IC and the broader national security community have a particular interest in is what we've been calling AI assurance. So how do we make sure that the algorithms that we deploy are robust to either to failure, kind of writ large, because when you deploy these algorithms out to the infinite world, they tend to fail in very fun and unique ways. But also it's been shown in the scientific literature that witting adversary can intentionally tamper with these things, and we exist in an inherently adversarial world. So how do we make sure that our algorithms are hardened to that and that we're able to continue operations even if someone's trying to muck with the system that we deploy? So those are the top 3 areas for machine learning that particularly excite me.
Great. Hey, let's change up gears a little bit here. We have another question. This one comes from Jetta Breslow, who asks, so many small companies do cutting edge S&T work, and they have a hard time collaborating with the government, getting complex procurement processes, security requirements, needs to show return on investment, et cetera. How is the intelligence community encouraging such companies to partner with the government on some of these, S&T challenges?
Yeah, so a few things. One of the initiatives that we do have kind of parallel to AIM is the Acquisition Agility Initiative, and I think Dustin mentioned that a couple of weeks ago as well. So how do we speed some of these processes up, right? I know I have friends that work in startup land, and the lifetime of a startup might be 18 months. And as anyone that's tried to get a government contract can attest, that might be how long it takes to cut a contract. So that's obviously unsustainable for us. So we're really trying to speed up a lot of these processes to make it less painful to deal with us. Additionally, things like this needs document that I've been talking about all day is the kind of first step to really being able to articulate these things. And I really like the way you framed it earlier, John, of engaging in this dialogue, right? So that isn't just kind of throw this document over the wall and say, good luck, but really start to engage in these conversations because we want to see your cutting edge technology and we want to see what you're doing. That's not to say that it will all be roses, because again, we do have some unique challenges, and sometimes it is hard to articulate those in a completely unclassified manner. So our commitment is to kind of learn and to keep working, and we have examples of this, right? In-Q-Tel has existed for 20 years now, and In-Q-Tel does great work with the startup community. Again, IARPA does the vast amount of its work at the unclassified level and works with companies, big, small, and academia as well. So we have examples. But again, if there's one theme to what I've been talking about today, it's how do we scale that up and how do we scale that out and make all those processes more effective? Because I know we're not doing as good a job as we should. I think we're doing a pretty good job now, but again, within the strategic environment in which we're operating, we have to be better. So that's really this underlying question is how are we better tomorrow than we are today?
Okay. Hey, continuing on this theme of dialogue, we have a question in from one of our frequent listeners from Clemson University, Grant Allard, and he has a question who asks, what is ODNI doing to leverage relationships with universities and facilitate tech transfer?
Yeah, so again, we have a few programs. So one, it's not a program, but again, IARPA does a ton of work. So encourage everyone that works out in academia to track the broad area announcements that IARPA releases and kind of engage on those R&D programs. Because I think that's a great kind of intro to the world of IC R&D, and might be a little biased as a former PM there, but a relatively painless way to get in. Within ODNI S&T, we have a few other programs. So we sponsor the IC postdoc program, where we sponsor postdoctoral researchers at academic universities on a variety of topics that are of interest to the IC. We do that via the ORISE program with the Department of Energy. So to put a little bit of a plug out there, the topics for this year's postdoc call will be coming out shortly, so you can check the IC postdoc website there. Either if you're a postdoc or a professor wanting to have a postdoc at your lab or something. As part of that, we host the IC Academic Research Symposium, which is broadly open, where we try to showcase the work that the IC is doing with academia, and there's a ton that goes on there. So again, sounding like a broken record here, we do a ton of work with academia. Really, my focus is how do we kind of focus this, and again, tap into other places like the National Science Foundation that funds, I think, nearly solely basic research within academia, and really figure out how to pull those basic R&D advances through to the IC, because they already have a large funding stream to do these engagements with academia. It's really about how do we plug in around the edges to make sure some of our unique questions might be being addressed.
Okay. Hey, I have another question here on a different subject. It's from Charles Robinson at IBM, and he has a quantum computing question. And he asks, is quantum computing a priority for the intelligence community, S&T community? And if so, who is the lead organization?
Yeah, definitely. So quantum falls into one of the bins that I was mentioning earlier about these kind of over the horizon things that we need to be concerned about. And I'll say, you know, who's the lead? We have some really great examples coming out of IARPA and, you know, again, basic R&D, and there's been some really interesting fundamental breakthroughs that have come out of funded IARPA programs in the quantum area. You know, both as well as enabling technologies like superconducting computing. And then our partners at NSA obviously do a ton of work in this area. And I think recently they released information about a new partnership that they're standing up at the Lab for Physical Sciences as part of the National Quantum Initiative that was recently announced by the broader US government and the Office of Science and Technology Policy. So we are kind of deeply tied into these broader national conversations about quantum. So it definitely is an area of interest and an area where the IC has invested significant resources to explore. And to your kind of earlier comments, John, a large amount of it out in the open, right? Mm-hmm. So again, NSA released a press release about this kind of work that they're doing. And again, IARPA works almost completely in the open on all programs, but especially quantum, you know, so to really get to these fundamental physics breakthroughs to enable the types of qubits that we need to do this. So yeah, definitely an area of interest, and definitely an area that I, you know, foresee us continuing to get after even more aggressively than we have in the past.
Yeah, I think that NSA program, that's with Johns Hopkins, if I'm correct. Are there other academic institutions you're partnering with for quantum?
For quantum in particular, I know NSA has partnered historically with MIT. I think there's also a partnership with University of Maryland, you know, kind of closely. I don't know like the performers that IARPA has funded off the top of my head. I'm trying to remember some of the slides that I've seen on that, and there's dozens of universities involved. So again, a pretty long history of intelligence community involvement in this area. And I think at some point, funding has flowed to nearly everyone involved in basic R&D related to quantum.
Okay. And we have another question here. Grace Schultz asks, the pandemic showed that early warning of biological and medical threats is or should be a national security priority. So her question is, based on that, is the IC now treating these threats differently, and what technologies are being developed to better protect the nation?
Yeah, so bio is one of these areas that I think is particularly interesting. And as I mentioned at the jump, is one area that's been moving very quickly recently. So, you know, understand the reasoning for putting it in the context of the pandemic, but maybe stepping a little bit away from that exact framing, just bio writ large, you know, engineered synthetic organisms, synthetic proteins, the threat space is very much expanding in the biodomain. So that is one area that we're actively looking at. In fact, my office sponsored a study with the National Academies of Sciences a couple years ago. It kicked off a couple years ago. It just finished about 6 months ago, called Safeguarding the Bioeconomy. So the bioeconomy writ large, not just bioweapons and not just pandemics, even though both of those are mentioned in the report, but you know, the food supply, medicine, you know, so how do we really protect and safeguard the bioeconomy, and how do we start to position the IC to understand some of those threats to this broader space? Because I think that report says that the bioeconomy is about $1 trillion sector of the economy, the broader economy. So that's obviously important. So we're already actively exploring both follow-ons to that study, as well as what actions we need to take based on some of the recommendations outlined there. So yep, bio definitely an area of concern, and we will continue developing in that area.
Okay. We have a question in from Nathan Wellborn, who asked, we hear about transition successes from DARPA from time to time, but not so much from IARPA. And he asked, can you share some successful stories from the IARPA side?
Yeah, so we definitely do have them. The reason you don't hear about them is because we are the IC. So, in the most successful cases, these are technologies that transition to IC applications. So a lot of the mission wins that we have with the things that are developed at IARPA, unfortunately, we can't share out in kind of these open forums. I'm sure if you grab Catherine Marsh, the director of IARPA, to do one of these things, she has unclassed examples she can give off the top of her head, but I unfortunately, and probably should, but don't have those locked and loaded to give right now. But I can say that there are very much wins that have come from the technologies developed within IARPA. I just don't have any I can share off the top of my head.
Okay. Hey, we have another question in from Paula Trimble, and she says, it seems that much of your focus for the IC-S&T is on, so-called industries of the future, AI, ML, quantum, biotech. She asked, what is the role of social and behavioral science in the IC's S&T portfolio? And do you have a program to collaborate with social scientists as you look, at all of the needs that you have?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess this wasn't in this version of my bio, but the dirty little secret is my PhD is in political science. So I am a social scientist by training, just play a machine learning researcher on TV. So social and behavioral sciences do hold a special place in my heart. So some of the areas where I think that's particularly interesting, IARPA is well known for its forecasting programs. So that kind of social behavioral forecasting really came out of econometrics and the political sciences. So those are the types of areas where we're really interested in tapping into SBS type research, as well as things like, how do we help analysts do their job better, right? How do we mitigate analytic bias? How do we, even in the program that I ran, which was an information search and retrieval program, what does it mean for content to be relevant to an analyst? That is a fundamental kind of behavioral science question and not really a computer science question. So those are the sorts of questions that we're really looking at when it comes to SBS. Again, to lean on the National Academies, we released at the very beginning of my run here as the director of S&T, the decadal survey of social behavioral sciences for national security. And that's hundreds of pages of recommendations about how the IC can leverage social behavioral sciences. So, if you're kind of curious what our thinking looks like that in that area, I can definitely point to that decadal study as kind of the magnum opus of how SBS can interact with IC mission problems.
Okay. Hey, I'm going to combine two questions that kind of have a similar theme, and they're about how your office interacts with others throughout the government. And one of the questions from Christopher Williams asked, how does the OD&I S&T Directorate interface with other S&T directorates across the IC? And then Joanne Sears, who's with Velocity Government Relations, asked, how does your office plan to work with the new U.S. Space Force?
Yeah, so to the first question, how do we interact with other S&T components? The director of S&T role is actually a statutory role. It's defined in the legislation that stood up the OD&I. And as part of that, it defines a body called the NISC, the National Intelligence, Science, and Technology Committee, which is comprised of the S&T principles of the IC. So this is CIA, DS&T, NSA Research, GA Research, so on and so forth, as the kind of big five that everyone knows off the top of their head. But we also have a big tent. So we also invite, the intelligence parts of DOE and state and Air Force and so on and so forth. So we really have a pretty full table when we have these meetings, or I guess virtual table now that we're all doing the talking heads in the box. So that's really the mechanism by which we interact with the community. And the point of that committee is to really, once we have this kind of set of needs, we develop that in concert with the NISC. But then whenever we're trying to figure out how to actually close some of these gaps that we've identified and surface new investments, that's run through that NISC body to really make sure that if we're investing in something, it satisfies the needs of the whole community and not just one particular agency. because that is the kind of fundamental role of the OD&I, is to integrate and lead the intelligence community. So that's in the blood of OD&I S&T. To the Space Force question, I will admit that we haven't really developed any discrete plans for how we'll interact with Space Force. But what I will say is, again, we are a big tent organization. So whenever they get to the point where they have S&T needs, particularly as they might relate to intelligence functions, more than happy to have them at the table and involved in these conversations with the NISC, because again, I think we're really strengthened by having more voices at these conversations, both in terms of what people are working on and being sure that we satisfy as many requirements as possible as we contemplate these new investments.
Okay. Finally, here, let's see, what's a good one for you here. Here's one from Roy Harper, who asked, to what extent is the IC&T community working to address disinformation, and what technologies are most effective in identifying and countering disinformation?
Yeah, so a little bit going back to the social behavioral science question, right? A lot of the disinformation is, kind of rooted in human cognition. So we do obviously partner very closely with programs that happen at DARPA. I think most people at this point have heard of programs like Metaphor and Semaphore. So we make sure that our needs and concerns are heard in those areas. But for us in particular, when it comes to our all-source analytic mission, what we're really wanting to do is verify the authenticity of information to make sure that whenever all-source analysts are writing their reports and providing information up to policymakers, we're able to characterize some of this information, right? So if there are 15 plausible explanations for why something happened, we want to be able to assess those and surface that up, right? So here's the 15 narratives about what might have happened, because again, that's all useful, relevant information to fully inform a policymaker. So from my point of view, that's really how we view some of these things, is being able to take in all this information, characterize it, and then be able to provide that up in our analytic reporting. So that gets very sticky very quickly, because, what is truth? And from an analytic standpoint, from a machine analytic standpoint, not a human analytic standpoint, how do you teach a machine what is true and what's false? How do you ground that? That gets into very quickly lots of questions about causality, right? Does this thing really follow from this other thing that was said? So, that for me, that really spurs a broader conversation about whether or not our machine learning solutions and our machine analytics solutions suffice right now. Not ours, the IC, but ours, the kind of broader scientific community that works on this. I think that's a pretty broad, open research question when you start getting into semantics and truthiness of statements.
Okay. Well, John, we have filled up our time this afternoon, and we have just a few minutes left. So I wanted to ask if you have any closing thoughts you would like to share with us.
Yeah, I mean, once again, just really want to say thanks for the opportunity, and want to, again, hammer home, if you haven't gotten it already, from as much as I've talked about it, that, these documents that I've described really will be up on the website, and we look forward to engaging with people. And we tend to have an open door policy in my office, so we really do welcome people coming chat with us and offering up their capabilities. We have an RFI out, the NSTEP RFI, that kind of facilitates some of that. But again, really looking for ideas and thoughts on how we partner better with industry. What I'll say is, I often hear, from a lot of these studies and things that come out, that the national security community needs to partner better with industry. But if you go back and read Science, the Endless Frontier, which was written by Vannevar Bush in the 50s, kind of describing, Vannevar Bush is really the one that set up our modern US S&T enterprise. He talks extensively about how the government needs to partner with industry. So this is something that we've been doing historically. So very much welcome ideas and thoughts on how we can do this better with industry. And again, how we can make sure that we are posturing the intelligence community properly against future threats and opportunities. So again, doors always open, or I guess in the age of COVID, emails always open, and welcome thoughts, comments, and encourage everyone to take a look at those documents whenever they drop. We'll do a press release and hopefully get that out to a broad audience. And again, thanks for the opportunity, and thanks to everyone for tuning in and listening to me talk about science and technology needs for 45 minutes.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much, John, for your time this afternoon and for your candid insights. And to everybody watching online that joined us, thank you. Once again, we'd also like to thank our sponsor, SAIC, for their critical support of this program. We hope that you will join us in the future for other INSA programs. And looking ahead, I do want to mention that next week on Wednesday, we'll hold a leadership luncheon with the new director of the JAIC, Lieutenant General Michael Groen. And rounding out the year for us, our final program in 2020 will be on December the 15th, where we'll have a coffee and conversation with Major General Charles Cleveland from NGA. Looking ahead into January, we're going to have a jam-packed month with a number of top leaders, including on the 6th of January, we'll host Major General Leah Lauterbach, who's with the new U.S. Space Force as their lead intelligence director. And also on January the 27th, we'll welcome the Director of Naval Intelligence, Vice Admiral Jeffrey Trussler, to the program. There's other events as well that'll soon be announced. And as always, you can find out all of this information and more on our website, insaonline.org. When the webinar ends, there will be a short survey that pops up. Please take a few moments to complete it. We read every one of these and let us know how we did. And that concludes today's program. Stay safe and healthy and have a good afternoon.